The year was 2003. This was before smartphones put a satellite in every idiot's pocket, before glowing food courts sanitized the highways. Back then, taking a shortcut on a state highway in the dead of winter meant you were effectively dropping off the face of the earth. The fog did not just roll in, it in fact swallowed the road, thick and suffocating, like breathing in wet concrete. Cutting through this abrasive nothingness was my beat-up white Maruti Esteem, its headlights bleeding weakly into the smog. It looked less like a car and more like a ghost ship navigating a sea of absolute pitch black. There were 3 of us in that car, returning from a wedding we had no business attending. Behind the wheel was me. I had the grim, unblinking stare of a man who suddenly realized he was the only adult in a rolling steel coffin. I gripped the steering wheel tight enough to strangle it. Riding shotgun was Rohan. Rohan possessed the survival instincts of a moth diving into a furnace. He was the kind of guy who would try to find a punchline at an open casket funeral. He mistook his own obnoxiousness for charm, a tragic flaw that consistently made me want to introduce his teeth to my dashboard. And slumped in the back was Samir. Samir was just there, an echo chamber for Rohan's terrible jokes, blessed with a weak stomach and the spine of a jellyfish. "Pull over, man. Seriously," Rohan groaned, kicking his boots up against the glove compartment. "I've got a tapeworm doing gymnastics in my gut. We haven't seen a single roadside joint in 2 hours." I didn't look away from the road. The fog was playing tricks on me, shaping the shadows of twisted trees into mangled bodies. "You wanted the shortcut, Rohan. Congratulations. We're in the middle of nowhere, so shut up and suffer." "He's right though, Kabir." Samir whined from the back, his breath fogging up the cold windows. "I would eat roadkill right now if you fried it." I exhaled a long, tired sigh. My eyes were burning. I was about to tell them both to get out and walk the rest of the way when a sickly, jaundiced yellow light pierced the fog on the left shoulder. As I rolled the Esteem closer, the source of the light revealed itself. It was a dhaba, a roadside eatery. But it looked like it had died a decade ago, and nobody had bothered to bury it. It was a dilapidated shack with a rusting tin roof illuminated by a single, flickering halogen bulb that buzzed like a dying hornet. There were no trucks parked outside, no blaring radios, just a few plastic chairs with missing legs and wooden cots that looked like they'd snap under the weight of a shadow. Rohan's face lit up like a kid finding a loaded gun under the Christmas tree. "Bingo, pull her in. Tandoori roti and dal, here we come." I hesitated. The place gave off a stench that had nothing to do with the food. It felt stagnant, like water trapped in a dead lung. "This place looks like a front for organ harvesting, Rohan. Let's keep moving." "Oh, come on, you paranoid freak. It's a dhaba, not a scary movie theater," Rohan scoffed, already popping his door open before I had fully stopped the car. Against my better judgment, I killed the engine. The cold hit us like a physical blow. We walked under the tin roof. Inside, a clay oven, a tandoor, was burning, casting long, dancing shadows against the soot-stained walls. Sitting next to the fire was an old woman. Calling her old felt like a massive understatement. Her skin was a roadmap of deep, leathery wrinkles. She sat perfectly still, staring into the flames with milky, cataract clouded eyes, looking like a corpse that had simply forgotten to stop breathing. Naturally, Rohan shattered the silence with the grace of a sledgehammer. Amma, what's on the menu? We're starving here. Hook us up with 3 plates of your best. The old woman didn't flinch. She just slowly turned her head, her dead eyes looking somewhere through Rohan, rather than at him. Without a word, she began slapping dough to make rotis. We sat down at a sticky, warped wooden table in the center of the shack. I couldn't shake the ice forming in my gut. My eyes scanned the grim surroundings, looking for an exit, looking for a reason to leave. And that's when I noticed the darkest corner of the room. There was another table there, pushed against the rotting wall. It only had one chair. But it wasn't just the empty chair and table. Sitting perfectly centered on the table, directly in front of that vacant seat, was a spotless steel plate. It was heaped with fresh food. Steam was rising off the lentils, curling into the freezing air, right next to a full glass of water. I nudged Samir under the table, nodding toward the corner. Samir shifted uncomfortably, the color draining from his face. Hey, who's that for? The place is deserted. But Rohan, bless his suicidal ignorance, followed our gaze, and a cruel, mocking smirk spread across his face. As the old woman approached our table carrying 3 steaming plates, Rohan couldn't resist. Well, he never could. Hey, Amma, Rohan sneered, pointing a thumb at the corner. You expecting a VIP or something? Setting out a romantic dinner for the invisible men, are we? Rohan barked a laugh. Samir chuckled nervously, a desperate attempt to lighten the suffocating mood. But I didn't laugh. I was watching the old woman. Her trembling, arthritic hands stopped dead. She turned her milky white eyes toward Rohan. The absolute lack of emotion on her face was replaced by something far worse. A deep, primal terror mixed with a chilling, quiet rage. When she spoke, her voice sounded like dry bones grinding together. Do not look at that chair, boy, she kind of whispered, the words scraping against the silence. And by no chance mock it. He is eating his dinner. If you ruin his appetite, he will feast on you instead. The old woman's warning hung in the freezing air, heavy and suffocating like a wet wool blanket over a drowning man. He will feast on you instead. Those milky, dead eyes were locked dead center on Rohan's face. The sweat on my forehead turned to ice. I did not need a degree in the occult to know that this wasn't a campfire story. The air in the room had shifted. It now tasted like copper and old dust. But Rohan possessed the self-preservation instincts of a lemming on a caffeine bender. The suffocating silence was just another stage for him to bomb on. He barked out a laugh, a loud, abrasive sound that felt like scraping a nail file across a chalkboard. Bravo, Amma. Give this woman a damn Oscar. Rohan clapped slowly, leaning against the grimy table. Is this the new business model? Scare the shit out of city boys with a ghost story so they buy more overpriced stuff? I respect the hustle. Samir, who looked like he was one loud noise away from a cardiac arrest, let out a pathetic, high-pitched giggle. Yeah, she's just messing with us, straight out of a B-grade slasher flick. But the old woman didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She just reached into a woven basket, tossed a dry, rotting piece of wood into the fire, and spoke with a voice that sounded like dirt falling on a coffin. You city boys think everything is a punchline, she muttered, staring back into the flames. 7 years ago, winter of 1996, the fog was just like this, thick enough to drown in. My 8-year-old grandson, Birju, was sitting right where you are. He was starving, almost crying from the hunger. The old woman's voice cracked, just a fraction. A hairline fracture in a stone wall. I handed him the first hot roti off the tandoor. He was so happy. He grabbed it and ran toward the edge of the road. A cargo truck came tearing through the fog. The brakes had failed. The driver didn't even touch the horn. And my Birju and that piece of bread, they both became a red smear on the frozen asphalt. She raised a trembling, bony finger and pointed at the empty chair in the corner. He died with an empty stomach, and the dead don't forget being hungry. Every night at 2 a.m., he comes back to this spot. I set out a fresh plate. He sits, he eats, and he leaves. But if someone occupies his chair, or if someone disrespects his meal, Birju takes them with him, and they never, ever make it alive. I was already on my feet. My appetite had evaporated, replaced by a cold, leaden weight in my gut. Rohan, Samir, we're leaving, right now. Bro, at least let us eat, Samir pleaded, his voice shaking, but I grabbed him by the jacket and hauled him up. I slammed a crumpled 100-rupee note onto the table. Keep the change, Amma, we're out. But Rohan hated taking orders, and he hated being proven wrong even more. To him, my panic was a joke, an overreaction that needed to be mocked. As I dragged Samir toward the exit, Rohan lingered. He walked over to the darkest corner of the shack, towards the empty table. I turned and shouted, my voice cracking with genuine panic. Rohan, get your ass out here, now. But Rohan did not listen. He stood over the steaming steel plate, an arrogant, punchable smirk plastered across his face. He leaned down, deliberately dipping his index finger directly into the hot lentils. Your ghost has terrible taste, Amma. The dal needs salt. Rohan sneered. He wiped his dirty finger on the edge of the plate, then dug into his denim jacket. He pulled out a filthy, crumpled 10-rupee note and flicked it directly into the center of the plate. There you go, Birju. Buy yourself some chocolate. The light bulb shattered. The shack was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The old woman let out a scream, but it wasn't a human sound. It was the feral, gut-wrenching shriek of a wounded animal. You ruined his food. You left him starving. Run! Run, you fools! I didn't think. I grabbed Rohan by the collar of his jacket and violently hurled him out into the freezing night. The three of us stumbled over the gravel. The fog outside had mutated. It was no longer just weather. It was a physical wall, pressing against us. My white esteem was barely a ghostly outline 10 feet away. "The car! Unlock the damn car, Kabir!" Samir shrieked, clawing at the back door handle. I slid into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely slot the key into the ignition. I twisted. The Esteem's engine, which usually purred like an asthmatic lawn mower, refused to turn over. Because of course it did. The universe has a sick sense of humor, and engines always flood when you're about to die. Rohan was no longer smiling. The color had completely drained from his arrogant face. He looked out the passenger window, back toward the shack. Standing in the fog, just at the edge of the dirt lot, was the old woman. But now she wasn't alone. Standing by her knees, barely visible in the swirling mist, was a small, pitch-black silhouette. "Kabir, Kabir, start the car. Start the goddamn car," Rohan begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched sob. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, muttered a prayer to a god I had not spoken to in years, and twisted the key with everything I had, and vroom. The engine roared to life. I slammed the shifter into first gear and floored the accelerator. The tires screamed against the dirt, caught the asphalt, and the Esteem shot forward, tearing blindly into the fog-drenched highway. For about 15 minutes, the car was a sanctuary of heavy, ragged breathing. Nobody spoke. The heater was blasting, but I couldn't stop shivering. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but swirling white mist. No shack, no old woman, no shadowy child. "We're clear," I exhaled, my grip on the wheel loosening just a fraction. From the back seat, Samir punched Rohan hard in the shoulder. "You absolute psycho. Why did you have to touch it? I nearly shat myself." Rohan rubbed his arm, the arrogance slowly bleeding back into his system as the distance between us and the dhaba grew. He let out a nervous, breathless laugh. "Relax, man. It was nothing. Just some old crazy bat trying to scam us. See, we're good." But Rohan's words died in his throat. The atmosphere inside the Maruti shifted. The vents, which had been pumping out hot air, suddenly became blasting wind that felt like it had been piped directly from a morgue. It was a vicious, biting cold that immediately began forming a layer of frost on the inside of the car's windows. And then I felt it. The steering wheel suddenly grew incredibly heavy in my hands. The nose of the Esteemed tilted upward slightly, the headlights aiming higher into the fog. The rear suspension groaned in protest. Something incredibly heavy had just dropped onto the back seat. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at me to keep my eyes on the road, I looked up into the rearview mirror. Sitting in the dead center of the back seat, right next to a paralyzed Samir, were two small, glowing yellow eyes. And then, cutting through the hum of the engine and the howling wind, came a sound. Crunch. It was the wet, metallic sound of someone chewing on something they shouldn't be eating. Beju hadn't stayed at the dhaba. He had hitched a ride. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the cabin, wet, metallic, and heavy. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. The blood in my veins turned to battery acid. Sitting right next to Samir, who was paralyzed, locked in a state of absolute, catatonic shock was a child. But calling it a child was a courtesy it didn't deserve. It was a casualty. His neck was snapped at a sickening 90-degree angle, resting on his collarbone like a broken doll. His skin was the color of dirty ash, and the stench rolling off him was a suffocating cocktail of burnt, rotting meat and freezing rain. The boy had his head bowed, chewing on something. Samir didn't even have the breath to scream. His eyes just bulged, tracking the boy's jaw as he worked up and down. I saw what the dead kid was eating. It was that filthy 10-rupee note Rohan had tossed onto the steel plate. Only now, the paper was soaked in a thick, black sludge that looked a lot like coagulated blood. The boy was grinding it between shattered, rotting teeth. Up front, Rohan was completely oblivious. The survival instinct of a brick. He just pulled his denim jacket tighter around his neck. "Kabir, seriously, crank the heater," Rohan chattered, rubbing his hands together. "It feels like a damn meat locker in here." Rohan turned around in his seat to complain to Samir, and the words died in his throat. The boy stopped chewing. He slowly cranked his broken neck upward. The bone audibly popped, crack, until his hollow, milky yellow eyes locked dead center on Rohan's face. "Where is my food?" The voice didn't sound like it came from vocal cords. It sounded like two rusted iron plates scraping against each other in the dark. Rohan lost his mind. He let out a shrieking, pathetic wail, pressing his back so hard against the passenger door, I thought he would break the handle. I didn't look back again. I stomped the accelerator through the floorboard. The steam's engine screamed, the speedometer needle violently vibrating past 100, then 110. But the car wasn't mine anymore. The steering wheel locked up. I yanked it with both hands, my knuckles turning white, but the column felt like it was set in concrete. The steam was gently, purposefully veering left, straight toward the deep, jagged ravine lining the highway. "I lost the wheel. He's pulling us," I roared. In the back, the shadow moved. The boy lunged forward, his mangled, freezing hands gripping the headrests of Rohan's seat. The stench of roadkill washed over the front cabin. "You ruined my food," the grating voice hissed right into Rohan's ear. Frost exploded across the inside of the windshield, blinding me completely. We were flying at 120 kilometers an hour into a solid wall of white fog, blind and paralyzed. Rohan was sobbing now, tears freezing on his cheeks. I'm sorry. Take whatever you want, please." But ghosts do not have mercy. They just do math, and Rohan had a debt to pay. The boy dug his jagged, frost-bitten nails deep into the side of Rohan's neck. Rohan shrieked as ribbons of blood instantly froze against his skin. Suddenly, cutting through the fog directly in front of us, two massive, blinding yellow headlights appeared. It was a cargo truck, and it was in our lane, barreling straight toward us at highway speed. It was clear that it was the phantom rig from 1996, the curse of the highway, coming to finish the job. "Kabir, the truck!" Rohan screamed, throwing his hands over his face. I had a fraction of a second. I didn't think. I stomped the clutch and ripped the emergency handbrake up as hard as humanly possible. The rear tires locked. The esteem violently fishtailed. The world spun into a chaotic blur of screaming rubber, shattering glass, and twisting metal. The car slammed through a wooden guardrail, launched off the shoulder, and plowed nose first into a massive embankment of soft dirt. And then, absolute silence. The only sound was the hissing of the ruptured radiator. I groaned, tasting blood in my mouth. The seatbelt had dug a trench into my collarbone, but I was alive. The windshield was shattered into a spider web, and the fog outside had miraculously vanished. I looked out the cracked glass. The car had crashed exactly 20 feet short of a massive, brightly lit toll plaza. The fluorescent lights of the booths bathed the wrecked esteem in a sterile, artificial glow. We had crossed the boundary. The light had broken the curse. I turned around, my neck screaming in agony. The back seat was empty. Samir was slumped against the door, unconscious, but a steady pulse thumped at his throat. In the passenger seat, Rohan was curled into a fetal position. He was hyperventilating, clutching his bleeding neck, but he was breathing. "He's gone," Rohan sobbed, rocking back and forth. "Kabir, he's gone." I let out a shuddering breath. I kicked my jammed door open and stumbled out into the freezing night air. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned against the crumpled trunk of the car, looking up at the bright lights of the toll plaza, thanking whatever gods were listening. I thought we had survived. I was about to walk toward the toll booths for help when I looked at the rear passenger window. My heart stopped beating. The window was completely frosted over, but pressed into that frost were the handprints of a child. Dozens of them, frantically slapping against the glass. But the handprints weren't on the inside of the car, they were on the outside. I slowly walked around to Rohan's window. Stuck under the rubber weather stripping on the outside of the glass, flapping weakly in the cold wind, was a 10-rupee note. It was half chewed, covered in thick black blood, and written in the frost of the glass, traced by a tiny, freezing finger, was a single line of text. "I am still hungry."